Dutch leader warns the New World Order is upon us. We are all in grave danger, he says. Dutch leader Thierry Baudet has warned that the New World Order is upon us now and has urged the public to recognize the grave danger it poses to human life. Baudet, founder and leader of the Dutch party Forum for Democracy FVD, runs a YouTube channel covering topics mainstream media shy away from. In his latest video, What's Wrong with the West?, he addresses problems plaguing the West and identifies three major trends responsible for what we're witnessing today: immigration, supernatural legislation, and climate change. According to Anonymous Wire, he says Thierry explains that these trends have emerged from Marxist ideology, sold to the public as a higher utopian state of existence, but that is eventually dystopian and doomed to fail. He further illustrates that we as humans are being in need of a sense of human beings are in need of a sense of community, but that these three major globalist projects are undermining this very foundation of our humanity. He says there's totalitarian global governance. These are three major projects that from the basis of every mainstream party in the West, both from left and right, said Baudet, all three represent a transition from one kind of society to another type of society, from a proud and strong nation-state to totalitarian global governance, as Baudet puts it. He says we would no longer be divided into different nations, different people, a world without parliaments that may decide things for just one country alone. Alone, and in doing so, greatly diverge from the parliaments of other countries. Indeed, it's a vision of a world in which we will supposedly all be growing towards one humanity governed by common rules that are the centralized administration on a global level. This would be a world in which a global superstate increasingly controls every tiny aspect of our lives because everything we do supposedly affects the climate. Concerning Marxism, he said, that is communism, we are in the midst of a structural remaking of the world as we know it. He said, our nations, our culture, political, spiritual homes are being dismantled. Slowly but surely, our societies are becoming so diverse that a shared common identity will no longer be feasible. We're losing our democracies because parliaments get to decide less and less, as well as our freedom because all of our lives are increasingly being regulated by the Change the Entire Economy project that masquerades as saving the planet. Baudet explains that it's crucial to understand that the fundamental idea behind these major trends is Marxism. These three grand projects embody in their entirety an orchestrated transition towards a supposedly higher utopian, peaceful, and egalitarian stage of existence. The long-promised post-capitalist era in which we will be all apparently live in peace or in unity. It is the Marxism of yesteryear in a new guise, but it is still Marxism, communism. He says the result of this will be dystopian, and Baudet explains this is because we are beings who need to feel we are part of a community. We also need to feel hope. All those great projects destroy those feelings, We become nowhere creatures living in a country surrounded by people we feel completely disconnected from and administered by bureaucrats over whom we have no control. The New World Order is upon us, Baudet declared. Europe has already gone a lot further down this path than America, but it is happening in the United States as well. It's a phenomenon we can witness across the Western world, and it's the greatest danger to our life, he says. Demographic transition leads to disaster. Baudet explains that study after study shows integrating large numbers of people from different backgrounds, cultures doesn't work. Therefore, the demographic transition leads to low trust and high crime societies with few cross-group connections. The idea might have been to create a super diverse society with a new type of man, liberated from all past roots, solely geared towards the future, willingly subjecting himself to a project focused on harmoniously living together. But the result is the opposite. It's renewed tribalism, animosity, and conflict, and that's what the demographic transition leads to, he said. Sovereignty transition undermines democracies. The transition of sovereignty, meanwhile, undermines our democracies, states Baudet. He says, of course, the European Union is already bullying European countries, but the United Nations increasingly intervenes with national decisions as well as do the International Criminal Court, several human rights commissions, the Davos conferences, the World Economic Forum, and so on. Climate Accord power grab. The party leader goes on to explain how they are only, quote, amplified by the climate accords that seek to reduce emissions. The overarching result is clear. The trick is with everything we do, we emit. Once the basic premise is accepted that emissions are somehow harmful, that we should limit such emissions to their very minimum, the new global administrators will then have an excuse to impose endless amount of regulations on our lives and take more control every day. Modern impersonal architecture completes this process of political disowning and spiritual expropriation. From Pyongyang of North Korea to Paris of France, the same lifeless hyper buildings disfigure the skylines of our ancient cities and symbolize the power grab of the international elites over our democracies. They also seem to symbolize the only presence of migrants, for we are all migrants, we're all anonymous creatures among those buildings, and the absence of a shared national community is referenced by buildings that we can identify with. The climate hysteria finally fills the spiritual gap that has been left by this process of disowning and overtaking our lives, he said, end quote. A reclaim and rebuild. It's the world we're heading for. It's the nightmare's vision of unfreedom. It's a future we have to prevent from materializing. We have to fight to protect our sense of home, freedom, and democracy. We have to reclaim control over our nation states. We have to combat the quasi-scientific nonsense about planetary disasters and see to it for what it is, a perverse pact between power-hungry politicians on the one hand and disowned people in spiritual need on the other. We've got to rebuild our homes, reclaim our lands, and restore our freedom, he said. This is by Sean Nadeau, by News Punch. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.